In the middle of a lavish wedding reception in Aspen, Colorado, I, a 65-year-old man, received a letter from my daughter while we were dancing. Her handwriting trembled. Everyone was smiling. Only I knew this was not a wedding. This was a hostage situation. Before the story begins, take a moment to like and subscribe to Stories with Meaning and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. The ancestral estate of this aristocratic family in Aspen, Colorado was breathtaking. Gold and ivory decorations adorned every corner of the grand hall. A classical string ensemble blended seamlessly with soft jazz, creating an elegant soundtrack as guests arrived in their finest formal attire. A luxury buffet stretched beneath a massive white marquee. Meanwhile, the documentary crew moved swiftly, capturing every polished smile and staged laugh. I sat quietly in a corner, wearing an old tailored suit that once belonged to my late father. The fabric had faded, the seams were loose in places, but it was the only formal suit I owned. My eyes observed the splendor in silence. Everyone assumed I was just a retired old man scraping by. No one knew that I was once a renowned art and philately collector, known in international auction circles only by the initials J.S. They saw an elderly man with a simple wooden cane, not someone who had once purchased a handwritten painting for over $150,000. My daughter, Eleanor, looked stunning in an emerald green gown. At 33, she was still young, still capable of choosing a better life. But her eyes betrayed unease that only a father could recognize. She had barely spoken since morning. Every time our eyes met, she seemed about to say something, then stopped herself. Her partner, Daniel Price, about 35 years old, appeared confident and charming. He greeted guests politely, kissed hands, joked with photographers. He was introduced as a faith-based tech entrepreneur, the founder of a digital startup supposedly attracting Middle Eastern investors. Truthfully, from the first time I met him 6 months ago, something felt wrong. His words were too sweet, his body language too calculated. But Eleanor looked happy, and I didn't want to be the kind of father who interfered in his adult daughter's life. The music shifted to a special piece for the father-daughter dance, a sacred moment, a symbol of family blessing. I was called to the stage. I walked slowly. My cane tapped softly against the marble floor. The guests applauded. Some wiped away emotional tears. We danced slowly, accompanied by gentle music. Eleanor gripped my hand tighter than usual. That was when she slipped a small folded note into the pocket of my suit. The movement was subtle, almost invisible. I pretended not to notice, but I felt the paper against my chest. There was an urgency in the way she did it. She looked at me briefly. A message she could not speak. After the dance, applause filled the hall. I returned to my seat calmly. My heart was pounding, but my face remained still. Minutes later, I excused myself, pretending to cough, and went to the restroom. Inside, standing before the mirror that reflected my wrinkled face and white hair, I opened the note. It was Eleanor's handwriting, the same handwriting I had known since she learned to write in elementary school. But now it was rushed, smudged with tears. "Dad, I'm sorry. I'm scared. They're not who you think they are. Please stop this before I lose everything." I stared at my reflection. The man looking back at me was old, but something long dormant inside him began to wake. This wasn't wedding anxiety. This was a cry for help. I folded the note and placed it inside the inner pocket of my suit. Then I walked back into the celebration. No one noticed anything. The party continued, laughing, drinking, celebrating. But in my mind, everything I had quietly prepared over the last 3 months began to move. Every discreet investigation, every piece of evidence, every contingency plan. I no longer saw a beautiful wedding. I saw a stage play that had to end. My eyes searched for Daniel. He was laughing with several men, clearly pleased with himself. He had no idea that the face watching him from the corner was not that of a helpless retiree. It was the face of a hunter who had finally found his prey. Not all thieves wear masks. Some wear suits, carry flowers, and call you Dad with a smile. My thoughts drifted back to 6 months earlier when I first met Daniel at our old estate in Salem, Massachusetts. He arrived in a brand new white SUV, carrying expensive fruit baskets and imported beverages. He immediately kissed my hand and said how much he admired traditional American family values. "Mr. Jonathan," he said, "this house is incredible. Authentic heritage architecture like this is rare now." I smiled politely. I'd heard those compliments for decades, some sincere, some not. During lunch, he kept praising the estate. Then, gradually, he began talking about idle assets. "These days, many seniors don't optimize their wealth," he said casually. "I noticed you have antique paintings, Chinese porcelain, rare stamps. It's a shame to let them sit. There are ethical investment platforms now, perfectly legal, transparent. The profits could support your retirement and Eleanor's future." His eyes didn't look at me. They scanned the room, evaluating prices. "Thank you," I replied, "but I'm comfortable with my current lifestyle." "Oh, of course," he smiled. "I'm not trying to change anything, just offering help." Eleanor looked captivated, so I stayed quiet. A few days later, I did something I hadn't done in years. I investigated. I contacted old connections from the art investment world, auction house veterans, a former financial regulator. "Daniel Price," one of them said. Never heard of him. 2 days later, the call came back. "Jonathan, that company isn't registered. No valid license. Be careful." I didn't confront him. Rushing only ruins strategy. I installed a hidden camera in my study, disguised among old art books. I planted fake financial documents, sealed, stamped, convincing. Weeks later, when Daniel visited alone under the pretense of wedding paperwork, I left the room deliberately. I watched remotely. Within 10 minutes, he entered the study. The camera captured everything. He opened envelopes, photographed documents, searched drawers, exactly as expected. I also placed a discreet tracker in his car. With help from an old friend in tech, I monitored his movements for 2 months. Notary offices of questionable reputation, problematic investment circles, the homes of other elderly individuals. Then came the night I will never forget. The camera recorded Daniel speaking with Laura, his sister, and their wedding planner. After the wedding, we slowly convinced Eleanor to put her dad in assisted living. Too complicated if he stays in that big house. Then we get power of attorney, transfer assets, if needed, move everything under the company. "Careful," Laura added. "Eleanor still loves him." "I'll say he's getting senti," Daniel said calmly. "It's for his own good." The blood surged through my veins. I encrypted the recording and stored it on a flash drive, hidden beneath a loose tile in the dining room floor, where they would never look. The next morning, I called Margaret Reynolds, my longtime friend and an attorney specializing in ethical finance. She knew exactly who I was. We met at a small coffee shop on Pine Street, and that was where the real game began. The place was modest, unremarkable. Exactly the kind of place that wouldn't attract the attention of people like Daniel or Laura. "I need your help," I said, sliding the flash drive across the table. "But not legal help in the usual sense. I need a plan." They would never suspect that our silence wasn't fear. It was observation. Margaret Reynolds listened to the recording, her expression growing darker with every sentence. "Jonathan," she said quietly, "this has crossed into criminal territory, a structured plan to seize an elderly person's assets." "I know," I replied, "but I don't want them to run before we have everything. If I confront them now, they'll claim it's all a misunderstanding, then disappear. Eleanor will be devastated, and they'll simply find another victim." During a deeper investigation, we uncovered something disturbing. Laura had been involved in a family investment fraud case 6 years earlier. She escaped consequences only because all the victims were relatives, too embarrassed to report it. This wasn't their first time. Margaret reviewed the old files in silence. We designed a 2-layer strategy. First, let the wedding proceed. Let them feel victorious, comfortable, careless. Second, bring them down legally and socially using recordings, witness testimony, and a financial trap we had already prepared. I can't stop this now, I said, staring at the cold coffee in front of me. I have to let them believe they've already won. Only then do we show them who's actually playing chess. But Eleanor's letter changed everything. My daughter couldn't endure the psychological pressure any longer. I was forced to choose. Stick to the long game or act now to save my child's sanity. The wedding day began under clear skies. Morning sunlight bathed the aristocratic estate in Aspen, Colorado, in warm gold. Ivory and gold decorations had been perfectly arranged since dawn. Staff hurried about, aligning chairs, testing sound systems, checking every detail. The air carried the scent of fresh flowers and refined cuisine. Guests arrived early. Some flew in from New York on morning flights. Others came from Los Angeles, staying overnight at nearby resorts. A few relatives arrived days earlier from Chicago. Women wore elegant designer gowns, men dressed in tailored suits. Nearly 180 guests filled the grounds. A long buffet stretched across the garden. Roast lamb, seafood platters, artisanal salads, gourmet desserts. Servers in crisp white uniforms moved efficiently, keeping everything pristine. I arrived earlier than scheduled. I wanted to observe Daniel and Laura closely. I sat on a bench near the edge of the garden. From a distance, Daniel looked radiant, giving directions to the media crew, laughing loudly with friends. Like today was the crowning achievement of his life. Laura was even busier. As the wedding planner, she moved non-stop, checking decorations, issuing instructions, projecting professionalism. I knew better. She wasn't organizing a wedding. She was selling an image. The Daniels family was respectable, affluent, and trustworthy. Morning sunlight bathed the aristocratic estate in Aspen, Colorado, in warm gold. Ivory and gold decorations had been perfectly arranged since dawn. Staff hurried about, aligning chairs, testing sound systems, checking every detail. The air carried the scent of fresh flowers and refined cuisine. I arrived earlier than scheduled. I wanted to observe Daniel and Laura closely. I sat on a bench near the edge of the garden. From a distance, Daniel looked radiant, giving directions to the media crew, laughing loudly with friends. Like today was the crowning achievement of his life. Laura was even busier. As the wedding planner, she moved non-stop, checking decorations, issuing instructions, projecting professionalism. Margaret Reynolds listened to the recording, her expression growing darker with every sentence. "Jonathan," she said quietly, "this has crossed into criminal territory, a structured plan to seize an elderly person's assets." "I know," I replied, "but I don't want them to run before we have everything. If I confront them now, they'll claim it's all a misunderstanding, then disappear. Eleanor will be devastated, and they'll simply find another victim." During a deeper investigation, we uncovered something disturbing. Laura had been involved in a family investment fraud case 6 years earlier. She escaped consequences only because all the victims were relatives, too embarrassed to report it. This wasn't their first time. Margaret reviewed the old files in silence. We designed a 2-layer strategy. First, let the wedding proceed. Let them feel victorious, comfortable, careless. Second, bring them down legally and socially using recordings, witness testimony, and a financial trap we had already prepared. "I can't stop this now," I said, staring at the cold coffee in front of me. "I have to let them believe they've already won. Only then do we show them who's actually playing chess." But Eleanor's letter changed everything. My daughter couldn't endure the psychological pressure any longer. I was forced to choose. Stick to the long game or act now to save my child's sanity. The wedding day began under clear skies. Morning sunlight bathed the aristocratic estate in Aspen, Colorado, in warm gold. Ivory and gold decorations had been perfectly arranged since dawn. Staff hurried about, aligning chairs, testing sound systems, checking every detail. The air carried the scent of fresh flowers and refined cuisine. Morning sunlight bathed the aristocratic estate in Aspen, Colorado, in warm gold. Ivory and gold decorations had been perfectly arranged since dawn. Staff hurried about, aligning chairs, testing sound systems, checking every detail. The air carried the scent of fresh flowers and refined cuisine. Morning sunlight bathed the aristocratic estate in Aspen, Colorado, in warm gold. Ivory and gold decorations had been perfectly arranged since dawn. Staff hurried about, aligning chairs, testing sound systems, checking every detail. The air carried the scent of fresh flowers and refined cuisine. Morning sunlight bathed the aristocratic estate in Aspen, Colorado, in warm gold. Ivory and gold decorations had been perfectly arranged since dawn. Staff hurried about, aligning chairs, testing sound systems, checking every detail. The air carried the scent of fresh flowers and refined cuisine. Morning sunlight bathed the aristocratic estate in Aspen, Colorado, in warm gold. Ivory and gold decorations had been perfectly arranged since dawn. Staff hurried about, aligning chairs, testing sound systems, checking every detail. The air carried the scent of fresh flowers and refined cuisine. Morning sunlight bathed the aristocratic estate in Aspen, Colorado, in warm gold. Ivory and gold decorations had been perfectly arranged since dawn. Staff hurried about, aligning chairs, testing sound systems, checking every detail. The air carried the scent of fresh flowers and refined cuisine. Morning sunlight bathed the aristocratic estate in Aspen, Colorado, in warm gold. Ivory and gold decorations had been perfectly arranged since dawn. Staff hurried about, aligning chairs, testing sound systems, checking every detail. The air carried the scent of fresh flowers and refined cuisine. Morning sunlight bathed the aristocratic estate in Aspen, Colorado, in warm gold. Ivory and gold decorations had been perfectly arranged since dawn. Staff hurried about, aligning chairs, testing sound systems, checking every detail. The air carried the scent of fresh flowers and refined cuisine. Morning sunlight bathed the aristocratic estate in Aspen, Colorado, in warm gold. Ivory and gold decorations had been perfectly arranged since dawn. Staff hurried about, aligning chairs, testing sound systems, checking every detail. The air carried the scent of fresh flowers and refined cuisine. Morning sunlight bathed the aristocratic estate in Aspen, Colorado, in warm gold. Ivory and gold decorations had been perfectly arranged since dawn. Staff hurried about, aligning chairs, testing sound systems, checking every detail. The air carried the scent of fresh flowers and refined cuisine. Morning sunlight bathed the aristocratic estate in Aspen, Colorado, in warm gold. Ivory and gold decorations had been perfectly arranged since dawn. Staff hurried about, aligning chairs, testing sound systems, checking every detail. The air carried the scent of fresh flowers and refined cuisine. Morning sunlight bathed the aristocratic estate in Aspen, Colorado, in warm gold. Ivory and gold decorations had been perfectly arranged since dawn. Staff hurried about, aligning chairs, testing. On the drive to the airport, Eleanor finally broke down in tears. Not from shame, not from sadness, but from relief. The weight she had carried for months had finally been lifted. "I'm sorry, Dad," she said, clutching my arm. "I didn't trust your plan. I really couldn't take it anymore." I gently stroked her hair. "It's okay, sweetheart. What matters is that you're free now." She hesitated. "But what about Daniel and Laura? They'll be furious." I looked out at the passing streets of Aspen, then smiled faintly. "Starting tomorrow," I said calmly, "they'll learn who they've been playing with all along." The best revenge isn't shouting, it's paperwork and timing. 3 days after returning to Massachusetts, I sat alone in the living room of our quiet colonial heritage estate. Eleanor was finally sleeping peacefully, for the first time in months. No nightmares, no anxiety about a terrifying future. But for me, the real war was just beginning. I made 2 calls. The first was to Margaret Reynolds, a razor-sharp attorney who had represented me for decades. She was well known for winning high-stakes inheritance disputes among elite families. The second was Thomas Carter, a former investigative journalist for a major national newspaper, now an independent legal and political columnist. His ability to uncover buried scandals had been proven since the pre-digital era. "I heard what happened in Aspen," Margaret said when she arrived the next morning. "A bold decision, Jonathan, but they'll retaliate. We need a strong legal strategy." Thomas arrived shortly after, carrying a laptop and a thick folder. "This might be the biggest investigation I've handled in 5 years," he said. "I started digging yesterday. There's a lot here." We gathered in the same living room where Daniel had once secretly photographed my documents. This time, it became our command center. I mounted a large whiteboard on the wall, pinned legal documents, printed records, and drew connecting lines between names, like something straight out of a detective film. "All right," I said, standing before the board. "We have 2 weeks to gather everything before they realize what's happening and try to erase their tracks." The investigation moved at full speed. Every day, from morning until well past midnight. Margaret handled legal filings and financial compliance. Thomas dug through databases, court records, and whistleblower sources. I coordinated everything, adding the information I had quietly collected for months. What we found about Daniel Price was shocking, even to me. He was drowning in debt, several $1 million. He had borrowed money from 3 unlicensed private lending cooperatives using falsified data and claiming to own an import-export business that never existed. "Look at this," Thomas said, turning his laptop toward me. "He's been blacklisted by 2 major investment platforms for defaulting on payments. And worse," he added, "he's never passed verification by the Financial Regulatory Authority to manage public funds. Every certificate he showed Eleanor was fake." The findings on Laura Price were no less disturbing. She had indeed been a defendant in a family investment scam 6 years earlier, a case involving losses totaling over $350,000 across 23 families. She escaped prosecution only because all the victims were relatives who chose silence over shame. "There's more," Thomas continued. "She was also involved in falsifying documents for a real estate project in Riverside, California. She sold housing units that didn't even have construction permits. 7 families were scammed." Margaret uncovered the most damning fact of all. "One of Laura's bank accounts," she said gravely, "is registered under the name of her adoptive parent who died 3 years ago. That's identity manipulation to evade financial tracing." As for Daniel's so-called company, our findings were conclusive. No legal registration, no corporate filings, no operational license. Even the website was a temporary domain, designed solely to impress potential victims like me. "So all this time," I muttered, staring at the evidence, "they were running a con with nothing but a laptop and a printer." Once everything was compiled, I planned our counterattack. Step 1. Publish the investigation through Thomas's legal blog, citing an anonymous source identified only as JS. Step 2. file a civil suit in Boulder County Court for attempted financial exploitation of an elderly individual. But before we could strike, Daniel moved first. He filed a countersuit for defamation. He demanded $5 million, claiming his reputation had been destroyed by the viral wedding cancellation. "He's bold," Margaret said while reading the filing, "but this is good. He's stepping into the legal arena where we are strongest." Laura followed with her own suit, claiming professional damages as a wedding planner. She demanded $1 million, alleging lost clients and reputation. We responded with the arsenal we had prepared. The recorded conversation about placing me in assisted living and seizing my assets became the cornerstone evidence. Photos of Daniel secretly photographing documents in my study were submitted as proof of malicious intent. 2 real estate investors stepped forward, victims of Laura's previous scam, finally willing to testify. "We've waited a long time for someone brave enough to stand up to her," one of them said. "Our savings vanished because of her lies." But the most powerful evidence came from an unexpected source: Eleanor. She provided a secret voice recording captured weeks before the wedding. In it, Laura pressured her to lie to a psychologist so I could be declared mentally unstable and stripped of financial authority. "Just tell the psychologist your father forgets things," Laura's voice said clearly. "Say he talks to himself. Once there's a report, getting power of attorney will be easy." "But my dad is healthy," Eleanor replied, trembling. "He doesn't forget." "It's just a formality," Laura said, "for his own good." Listening to it, rage burned inside me. But I stayed calm. Emotion solves nothing. Margaret immediately filed for an emergency protection order. "This qualifies as psychological abuse and a coordinated threat against a senior citizen," she said firmly. The presiding judge, Richard Holloway, known for his integrity, reviewed the evidence. He approved the order without hesitation. Daniel and Laura were legally barred from approaching me or Eleanor within 1,000 feet. "The evidence clearly indicates a structured plan to exploit assets and manipulate an elderly individual," Judge Holloway stated. The media caught the scent of a major scandal. Thomas's exposé, how a wedding planner and her fiancé targeted wealthy seniors, went viral overnight. Tens of thousands read it. Investigative outlets reached out to the anonymous source. I didn't respond. I wanted them to rot in their own silence. Justice doesn't always need headlines. Sometimes the most effective justice works quietly. Still, the impact was immediate. Daniel's associates distanced themselves. His so-called investors vanished. Even rideshare drivers began refusing him after recognizing his name. Laura fared worse. The Midwest Property Association expelled her from membership. Wedding clients canceled contracts and demanded refunds. Her social media flooded with accusations from long silent victims. "She's been suspected for years," one association leader said during an interview. "No one dared file a formal complaint until now." Cornered, Daniel and Laura struck back desperately. They hired a cheap attorney and claimed I had manipulated them, pretending to be poor to entrap them. "Absurd," Margaret scoffed. "There's no law against living modestly, and it certainly doesn't justify fraud." Their defense collapsed quickly. Their lawyer didn't even know about the recordings. He claimed his clients only wanted to help manage assets. "By falsifying documents and planning involuntary confinement?" Margaret asked dryly in court. When the main hearing opened and Judge Holloway reviewed our full submission, he said something that made my heart race. "For a case of this magnitude," he said, "we will need you to testify as who you truly are, not just as the victim's father, but also as J.S., the individual referenced in the investigation." The time had come to remove the mask I'd worn for years. to let the world see who the old man with the wooden cane really was. They thought I was a lonely retiree. They were wrong. I was the man who could bring their entire world down with a single statement in court. The day of the main hearing at the Slyman District Court arrived under a heavy, overcast sky. Thick gray clouds hung low, as if the weather itself sensed the tension about to unfold. Since dawn, reporters had crowded the courthouse grounds. The investigative article written by Jack Miller, titled "How a Wedding Planner and Her Fiancé Target Wealthy Seniors," had circulated widely for the past 2 weeks. National media outlets picked up the case with eye-catching headlines. Future son-in-law traps retired teacher, allegedly after hidden inheritance. Elite wedding scandal when fake love meets concealed wealth. Poor retiree revealed as a $1 million art collector. The courtroom, usually half empty, was packed to capacity. Special seating had been prepared for journalists due to the overwhelming public interest. Several television cameras were even granted special permission to broadcast portions of the hearing. Daniel Price entered wearing a wrinkled suit, his face pale and hollow. He looked like someone who hadn't slept in days. Beside him sat a cheap, visibly unprepared lawyer, clearly overwhelmed by the scale of the case. Laura Price looked even worse. Heavy makeup failed to hide her swollen eyes and exhausted expression. She had already changed lawyers 3 times in the past 2 weeks. No reputable attorney dared to stay after reviewing the evidence against her. After the panel of judges entered, I took my seat on the plaintiff's bench alongside Margaret Reynolds and our legal team. Eleanor sat behind me, offering silent support. For the first time in months, she looked calm, confident even. At exactly 9 a.m., Judge Benjamin Holloway entered the courtroom. The room fell into absolute silence. "All rise," the bailiff announced. Judge Holloway took his seat and spoke firmly. "This court is now in session. Today, we will hear the defamation lawsuit filed by Daniel Price and Laura Price against Jonathan, as well as the countersuit alleging attempted asset seizure and psychological manipulation of an elderly individual." Daniel's attorney opened with a defense I had already anticipated. He claimed his clients were victims of slander, that this was nothing more than a publicity stunt orchestrated by a jealous family. He painted me as a bitter old father, supposedly resentful that his daughter was about to marry a more successful man. "Your Honor," the attorney said dramatically, "my client is a successful young entrepreneur who merely wished to help his future family manage and optimize their assets. His good intentions were twisted into baseless accusations." Margaret Reynolds smiled faintly. She had dismantled stronger arguments than this. Then it was my turn. I was called to the witness stand. Every eye in the courtroom fixed on a 65-year-old man walking slowly with a simple wooden cane. I wore a clean white shirt and black dress trousers, the same outfit I always wore to important occasions. Daniel looked almost relieved when he saw me. Perhaps he thought I would speak as nothing more than an offended, impoverished father, just as he and his lawyer had planned. "Please state your identity," Judge Holloway said. I took a deep breath. The moment had arrived. The moment the mask I had worn for years would finally fall in front of the entire public. "My name is Jonathan," I said calmly. "I was born in Massachusetts 65 years ago. My highest education is a bachelor's degree in fine arts. Before retirement, I worked as an art and history teacher. My current status is retired." I paused. My eyes scanned the room, over reporters poised to write, cameras recording every breath, and finally Daniel's face, which was beginning to stiffen with unease. "And," I continued evenly, "I am also known in the international auction world by the professional initials J.S." The courtroom atmosphere shifted instantly. Several journalists familiar with the art world whispered loudly to one another. Cameras zoomed in. Even Judge Holloway looked visibly surprised. "J.S.?" he asked carefully. "As in the internationally recognized art and philately collector?" "Yes, Your Honor," I replied. "I have collected fine art and rare philatelic pieces for 30 years. Several works from my collection have been exhibited in Singapore, Hong Kong, and Amsterdam." Margaret stood and handed a thick folder to the judge through the clerk. "Your Honor," she said, "these documents verify our client's identity." Judge Holloway opened the folder, and his eyes widened. Inside were certificates of authenticity for a Hendra Gnawan painting hanging in my living room, valued at approximately $2 million. Documentation for a colonial-era Dutch East Indies philatelic collection, valued in the hundreds of thousands. An insurance policy covering my entire art collection, with total coverage exceeding $500 million. "These," Margaret continued, "are long-standing contracts between our client and Christie's Singapore and Sotheby's Hong Kong. In international collector circles, the initials J.S. carry significant respect." The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Reporters typed furiously. Photographers' shutters clicked non-stop. But the most dramatic reaction came from Daniel and Laura. Daniel stared at me as if he had seen a ghost, his mouth slightly open, unable to speak. Laura swayed in her chair, her hands trembling as she lifted a glass of water. "So, you deliberately concealed your identity?" Judge Holloway asked. "Yes, Your Honor," I replied. "After my wife passed away 10 years ago, I chose to live modestly. I wanted to protect my daughter from people who might only be interested in money. I never displayed my wealth. I never discussed the value of my collection, even with Eleanor. I grew firmer. Daniel Price and Laura Price assumed I was weak because of my age and appearance. They devised a systematic plan: marry my daughter, have me declared mentally unfit, place me in assisted living, obtain full power of attorney, and transfer all my assets into their names." Margaret activated a speaker. A recording filled the courtroom. Daniel's voice rang clearly. "After the wedding, we slowly persuade her to put her dad in assisted living, too complicated if he stays at home. Then, we handle the power of attorney and manage the assets." Laura's voice followed. "Tell Eleanor to say to the psychologist that her father forgets things, that he talks to himself. Just say he can't take care of himself anymore." The courtroom erupted in chaos. Gasps, angry murmurs, furious whispers. "Order," Judge Holloway demanded. Margaret spoke again. "Your Honor, this recording was obtained from security cameras installed legally in my client's own home after he began to suspect malicious intent." "Is there additional evidence?" the judge asked. Jack Miller was then called as an expert witness. He presented the full investigative findings. "Your Honor," Jack said, "Daniel Price is indebted for several $1 million to 3 illegal private lending cooperatives. He used falsified data to obtain these loans. The company he claimed to own, Sharia Link Solutions International, is not registered anywhere." As for Laura Price, she was previously involved in a pyramid investment scam totaling approximately $500,000, affecting 23 families. She also used a bank account registered under the name of an adoptive parent who passed away years ago to conceal financial trails. Then came an unexpected twist. Jack introduced a new witness. Derek Lawson, a former employee of a co-working space Daniel frequently used. "Your Honor," Derek testified, "I often overheard Daniel bragging to friends. He said he was about to get a wealthy father-in-law who could be controlled. He said, 'The old man pretends to be poor, but his house is full of expensive antiques. After the wedding, it's just strategy. Everything will be ours.'" Daniel's lawyer attempted to object, but his arguments fell apart instantly.
"Your Honor," he stammered, "this is all a fabrication meant to avoid moral responsibility." "Moral responsibility for what?" Margaret cut in sharply. "For allowing oneself to be deceived and robbed?" After reviewing all testimony and evidence, Judge Holloway delivered a decisive ruling. Based on the recordings, documentation, and witness statements presented, this court finds clear and convincing evidence of malicious intent and a structured plan to exploit an elderly's assets. The defamation lawsuit filed by Daniel Price and Laura Price is hereby dismissed in its entirety. Conversely, the countersuit filed by Jonathan is granted, and this case will be forwarded to the district attorney for criminal prosecution. The rulings continued. A permanent protection order was issued for Jonathan and Eleanor. Daniel Price and Laura Price were prohibited from contacting or approaching them in any form. Daniel's case was forwarded for prosecution on charges of layered fraud, document forgery, and attempted elder exploitation. Laura's case was forwarded for identity falsification, embezzlement, and participation in an organized criminal plan.
What hurt Laura Price the most was the reaction of her own extended family. Those who had once been victims of her fraudulent saving schemes finally found the courage to speak openly. Cousins who had remained silent out of shame now came forward to testify to the media about how Laura had deceived her own relatives. "We've known about her behavior for a long time," said Rena Caldwell, Laura's cousin, during an interview with a local television station. "But because she was family, we kept quiet. Now we feel relieved. Someone finally stood up to her." 1 week after the verdict was handed down, I received 2 letters in the mailbox of our colonial estate. One was a thick envelope bearing the official stamp of a Colorado State Correctional Facility from Daniel Price, who had been detained after being proven guilty of using forged documents for loans. The other was a thin envelope without a clear return address, most likely from Laura. I placed both letters into the drawer of my work desk without opening them. Not yet. My heart needed time to settle after the storm of drama that had passed. Eleanor noticed. "Dad, you're not going to read them?" she asked softly. "Not now," I replied. "Right now I want to focus on our future, not on a past that's already behind us." But deep down, I knew those 2 letters would determine whether this story truly ended or whether there was still one final chapter left to face. After the noise faded, only one question lingered. Should I respond or let go? 2 months after the court ruling, our colonial estate fell quiet again. The media had moved on in search of fresher headlines. The reporters who once camped outside our gate were now chasing the latest political scandal. What remained was ordinary life, slowly returning to normal, or at least attempting to. Only Eleanor and I lived in the large house now. Emotional wounds became more tangible once the adrenaline faded. Long evenings were filled with conversations about the future, about rebuilding trust, about learning to forgive oneself for nearly falling into someone else's trap. "Dad, I feel stupid," Eleanor admitted one night as we drank tea on the back porch. "How could I not see the signs? How could I not realize Daniel was a fraud?" "Eleanor," I said gently, resting my hand on her head, "love has a way of blinding us to what should be obvious. That wasn't your fault. They were professionals at manipulating emotions." She slowly returned to her routine as an elementary school teacher. Her students welcomed back their favorite teacher, the one who had briefly gone viral on television. They didn't know the complicated drama behind the scenes. All they knew was that Miss Eleanor had an incredible father. In her free time, Eleanor began attending community art programs at the Aspen Cultural Park. That's where she met Evan Carter, a 30-year-old curator working at a contemporary art museum. Evan was sincere, grounded, and most importantly, never asked about money or family wealth. "Dad, Evan knows who you really are, but he's not interested in collections or asset values. He'd rather talk about the philosophical meaning behind art." I smiled. "That's a good sign," I said. "People who love art for art's sake usually have clean hearts." A month later, I decided to host a small art exhibition at the Aspen Art Center. Not a commercial exhibition, but one with a social mission. I titled it, The Dignity of a Father. It featured selected works that had long been stored inside our home. A painting by Hendra Gunawan depicting the struggle of ordinary people. A vibrant work by Afandi full of raw life energy. Several classical hand-drawn batik pieces from Central Java. A rare philatelic collection spanning the colonial era through independence. Each piece was displayed with in-depth explanations of its historical and philosophical significance. "Jonathan," said Margaret Whittemore, director of the Aspen Art Center, "this is the most meaningful exhibition we've ever held, not because of its economic value, but because of the story behind each piece." What made the exhibition truly special was my decision to auction several works for charity. All proceeds, totaling several $1 million, were donated to the Independent Seniors Foundation to build a protection center for elderly individuals vulnerable to fraud and manipulation. "I want what happened to us to become a lesson and a shield for others," I said during the opening speech. The public response was overwhelming. Visitors came not only to see the art, but to share their own stories. Dozens of elderly individuals confessed that they had nearly been deceived by family members, close friends, or people who claimed they wanted to help. "Jonathan, thank you for having the courage to speak," said Harold Thompson, a retired civil servant. "I realized my own son-in-law had similar plans. Because of your story, I became alert and stopped it before it was too late." Susan Miller, a 70-year-old widow, broke down in tears. "My nephew has asked me for investment money 3 times. After hearing your story, I finally said no. It turns out he really was a con artist." My story became a symbol of quiet resistance, not resistance through violence or rage, but through intelligence, patience, and the courage to say no to injustice. Social media flooded with testimonials. Hashtags about standing up to scammers trended for weeks. Several universities even invited me to give public lectures on protecting oneself from familial fraud. And yet, amid all the public appreciation, 2 unopened envelopes still rested inside my desk drawer. 3 months had passed since I received them. Every time I glanced at the drawer, a small voice inside asked whether it was finally time. One afternoon, while Eleanor was out with Evan, I decided to open both letters. I sat in the wooden chair in my study, the same room where I once installed hidden cameras to observe Daniel. Late afternoon light filtered through the window, illuminating the old wooden desk that had accompanied my life for decades. The first letter was from Daniel Price, a thick envelope stamped by the Colorado State Correctional Facility. His handwriting was familiar, but stripped of the arrogance I once sensed. "Jonathan, I write this letter from my cell with a heart full of regret. The past 3 months have completely changed my perspective on life. I admit my guilt in everything I have done. I admit that I was greedy, manipulative, and amoral. What I regret most is playing with Eleanor's feelings and attempting to destroy the beautiful bond between a father and a daughter. Prison has given me time to think. I now realize my problems began with an excessive lifestyle and the desire to become rich instantly. I drowned in debt because of pride, and when I met Eleanor, I saw her as an easy escape. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I want you to know that I regret my actions every single day. I've written a letter to Eleanor as well, but I hesitate to send it. Perhaps it's better not to disturb her happiness anymore. I'm currently enrolled in a rehabilitation program and learning tailoring skills. I hope that when I'm released, I can live honestly through my own abilities. Please convey my deepest apology to Eleanor. I hope she finds true happiness with someone who genuinely loves her. Respectfully, Daniel Price." I set the letter down and opened the second envelope. Laura's letter was much thinner. Her handwriting was rushed, the ink sometimes smeared. "Jonathan, I'm writing this letter from a small rented room on the outskirts of Denver. My life has completely collapsed since this case came to light.
I won't pretend to feel remorse the way Daniel does. I'm angry with you for destroying my life. I never imagined that the man who looked weak and powerless actually possessed the strength to bring everything down. But at the same time, I admit that what I did was wrong. I've lived too long deceiving others, including my own family. Maybe this is karma. Now I've lost everything. Clients gone, reputation destroyed, family turned away. I have to start from zero at an age that's no longer young. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just want you to know that I will stay away from your family forever. I will never contact Eleanor or you again. This is my last letter. After this, consider me as someone who never existed in our lives. Laura. After reading both letters, I sat in silence for a long time. My heart beat slowly as I considered the right response. Should I reply, offer second chances, or close the door to the past forever? I took out a sheet of paper and began writing.
What matters most to me is a clear assurance that you will no longer interfere with my family. If your promise to keep your distance is sincere, then I will consider this chapter closed. I will not pursue you, nor will I seek further retaliation. However, if you break that promise, I will not hesitate to take the necessary legal action. Life offers every person a choice, the choice to become better or to remain in darkness. The decision is yours, Jonathan. After writing both reply letters, I felt the weight on my chest ease slightly. Not because I had fully forgiven, but because I had responded fairly, without excessive resentment. 2 days later, when Eleanor returned home from teaching, she brought wonderful news. "Dad, Lucas invited me to join him in an art exhibition at the Cultural Arts Center next month. The theme is love and art in everyday life." "That's wonderful, sweetheart," I said. "I'm glad you'll be collaborating." "Dad, Lucas has also asked for permission to introduce me to his family. He says he's serious." I looked at my beloved daughter. Her eyes sparkled, but this time not because of sweet words or empty promises. This time it was because she had found someone who loved art, respected family, and never spoke about money. "This time," I said gently, "I trust your choice, but we'll still be careful. There's nothing wrong with getting to know someone more deeply before making a big decision." "Of course, Dad," she replied. "This time I'll be wiser." A month later, I hosted a small gathering at our colonial heritage estate to introduce Lucas to our extended family. A few relatives, old friends, and colleagues from the art world attended. Lucas was natural, never trying too hard to impress. Most importantly, he showed genuine respect for our family traditions. "Mr. Stone," Lucas said, as we spoke quietly on the back terrace, "I truly admire the way you protect your family. It shows that a father's love has no age limit or condition." "Lucas," I replied, "a father's duty is to ensure his child's happiness with the right person, not someone rich or famous, but someone sincere." That night, after all the guests had left and Eleanor was asleep, I sat alone on the back veranda. The sky was full of stars, the air cool, and for the first time in over a year, my heart was at peace. I did not answer wrongdoing with wrongdoing. I answered it with a life that was more honest and stronger. Daniel Price and Laura Price had already faced the consequences of their actions, not because I punished them, but because justice has a way of working on its own. What mattered most was that Eleanor was now happy. She had found genuine love, built a meaningful career, and learned from painful experiences to become wiser. I looked at the collection of paintings in the living room, visible from the veranda. Beautiful works that had accompanied my life, once nearly taken by those with ill intent, now safely returned to their rightful place. But the most valuable thing was not the art or the rare collections. It was the peace of mind that came from protecting what mattered most to me, my daughter's happiness. True victory is not the destruction of one's enemies, but the safety and joy of those we love. And that night, beneath the starlit sky of Aspen, Colorado, I knew my battle was over. Not with anger or revenge, but with a father's love that will never surrender.